My name is Samantha Hudson. I'm 34, and I'm a real estate attorney. Which is the only reason I didn't fall apart the afternoon my mother told my 8-year-old daughter she was homeless. It was the first real snow of the year. Lily came home from school, walked up the front path she'd walked 1,000 times, and found a bright yellow sold sign staked into our lawn. The front door was locked. My mother opened it just wide enough to look down at her and say the house wasn't ours anymore, that Lily was homeless now, and that she should go wait at the gate. My little girl sat on the cold stone step and waited. 4 hours. In the snow. When I finally found out, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I said one word. I said, okay. Then, days later, 16 hours after I started filing the paperwork, 3 different phones started ringing across town, and not one of those calls was for me. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people meet impossible family choices, and the quietest decision in the room turns out to be the loudest. If you've ever been the one everyone expected to just absorb it, to smile, to forgive, to let it go, then stay with me, because this is the story of the day I stopped letting it go. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. Let me back up too before any of it. We lived in a narrow 2-story on Birchwood Lane, in a town small enough that the mailman knew our dog before he knew our names. I bought that house myself, 3 years after the divorce, with money I earned closing deals for other people's families. I paid it off early. My name, and only my name, sat on the deed at the county. I used to think that meant something permanent. The kitchen table was a museum of Lily's artwork, crayon horses, a lopsided sun, a family of stick figures that was always just the two of us. By the door hung her bright red mittens on a little brass hook, because she lost everything else, but never those. She was 8 going on 40, the kind of kid who corrected my grammar and then asked me to check for monsters. That winter I'd just won a nasty property dispute at the firm, a brother forging his sister's name onto a quitclaim deed, thinking nobody would check the notary log. I checked the notary log. I always check the notary log. I came home that night feeling good about the world, which the universe apparently took as a personal challenge, because somewhere across town, in a group chat I didn't know existed yet, my mother was already typing. I thought owning the deed meant we were safe. I was about to learn the difference between owning a house and protecting it, and the difference, it turns out, is measured in the 4 worst hours of my daughter's life. The morning it happened, the forecast promised a foot of snow by dark. The school called at 10 and said they were releasing kids early. I was due in court at 1 for a closing day emergency, the kind you can't reschedule because 40 people are waiting on a signature. So I did the thing I hate most. I asked for help. My parents lived 12 minutes away, and my mother answered on the second ring, sweet as pie. Of course we'll grab her, she said. Drop the worry, Sammy. I should tell you that asking my mother for anything cost me something. I'm the daughter who never needed rescuing, the one who paid her own way through law school while my brother got a car. Needing her felt like handing over a weakness. But it was one afternoon. One favor. I texted Lily's teacher to release her to Grandma, kissed nobody because nobody was there, and drove to court in the gray light. The whole way down I had a small, itchy thought I couldn't scratch. Lately my mother had been odd, asking questions she'd never asked before. How much was the house worth now? Was it really all in my name? Did I have a will? I'd brushed it off as a 63-year-old getting nostalgic about estates. Mistake number 1. I won my hearing at 1:40. I silenced my phone, the way you do in a courtroom, and slid it face down into my bag. For the next 3 hours while I argued about easements, my daughter was learning what a stranger her own grandmother could be. Here is what Lily told me later in the small flat voice kids use when they're trying very hard to be brave. Grandpa drove her to our house around 3. The snow had started, fat, slow flakes that stuck to her eyelashes. And there, planted in the middle of our front lawn, was a yellow sign she'd never seen before. Sold, in letters bigger than her head. She didn't know what it meant. She ran up to the door and it wouldn't open. She knocked. She rang this bell. Finally, my mother opened it, maybe 4 inches, and looked down at her like she was a delivery left at the wrong address. This isn't your house anymore, she said. It's been sold. You're homeless now, sweetheart. Then she said the words I will hear in my sleep for the rest of my life. Go wait at the gate. And she closed the door. 8 years old. A locked house with the lights on inside. A grandfather who stayed in the warm car at the curb and then, when Lily looked at him, simply pulled away. My daughter walked back down the path, past the sold sign, and sat on the bottom step by the gate where my mother told her to sit. She thought she'd done something wrong. She thought if she waited politely enough, somebody would come back and explain. The snow kept falling. Her red mittens, the ones on the brass hook in the house she could see through the window, were inside, of course. So she tucked her bare hands into her sleeves, and she waited at the gate, exactly like she'd been told. 4 hours. I keep saying it because I still can't make it fit inside my head. From 3 until nearly 7, while the temperature dropped and the streetlights came on, an 8-year-old sat on a stone step in a cotton coat because the adult inside the house wanted her gone. Cars passed. Nobody stops for a kid sitting quietly. Quiet kids look like they belong somewhere. What saved her was Mrs. Petrov, our neighbor 2 doors down, 71 years old and the only person on Birchwood who notices everything. She'd seen the sold sign go up that morning and thought it was strange, because she and I waved at each other every day and I'd never said a word about selling. Around 7 she looked out and saw a small shape on my step, unmoving under a dusting of white. She came out in her slippers and pulled Lily inside and wrapped her in 3 blankets and put a mug of cocoa in her hands that Lily was too cold to hold. Then she did the thing my mother couldn't be bothered to do. She found my number, the one I'd given her years ago for emergencies, and she called. I was packing my briefcase, riding the high of a win, when my phone lit up with her name. I almost let it go to voicemail. I answered out of habit. Samantha, she said, and her voice was shaking. Your Lily has been sitting outside your house in the snow for hours. Your mother locked the door. Honey, get here now. The courtroom hallway tilted. I didn't say anything clever. I just ran. I don't remember the drive. I remember the roads were bad, and I didn't care. I remember pulling up to Mrs. Petrov's and seeing my daughter through the window, cocooned in blankets, her face blotchy from crying and cold, and something in my chest went very still and very clear. She ran to me. She was shaking. The first thing she asked, the very first thing, was whether she'd been bad. I held her and told her no. Never. Not once. And over her shoulder I could see the yellow sold sign glowing in my own front yard like a wound. Mrs. Petrov had already turned the heat up and was talking about hospitals and frostbite, but Lily was warm now, just frightened, and what she needed was her mother and her bed. While I held her, my phone buzzed against my hip. A text. From my mother. I read it over Lily's hair. We're doing what's best for the whole family, don't make this dramatic. I looked at those words for a long moment. Every loud thing I could have typed lined up in my mind and then quietly stood down, because loud things are for people without a plan. I typed back one word. I typed, okay. Then I put the phone away and carried my daughter to the car. People hear okay and assume surrender. They picture a woman giving up. But in my line of work, okay is what you say when you've stopped arguing and started filing. My mother thought she'd won an argument. What she'd actually done was hand a real estate attorney a forged sale, a locked door, and a witness, and then tell her not to make it dramatic. That night I did everything right before I did anything else. I ran Lily a warm bath, not hot, because you warm a cold child slowly. I checked her fingers and toes and the tips of her ears. I made grilled cheese, her favorite, and I let her fall asleep in my bed with the lamp on. Only when her breathing went deep and even did I open my laptop at the kitchen table, under the crayon horses and the lopsided sun. I needed to understand the shape of what had happened. So I pulled up the county property records, the same database I use 40 times a week for clients. There it was. One owner of record. Samantha R. Hudson. Mortgage satisfied. Lien released. Homestead exemption filed. A clean deed. The cleanest I'd ever seen, because I'd made it that way on purpose. Which meant the sold sign in my yard was a lie wearing a costume. A sign in the grass is marketing. A deed at the county is law. Somewhere, somehow, my mother had managed to list my house for sale, to get a sold sign printed and an offer accepted, and to do all of it without the one signature that legally matters in the entire universe. Mine. I sat back. The fear I'd carried in from the car began, very slowly, to turn into something more useful. Because a problem you can't see is terror, but a problem written in public records is just a case, and I solve cases for a living. The only question left was the one that would decide everything. How exactly had she pulled my name into a sale I'd never agreed to? I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, the one I never touch, because I already had a sick feeling I knew. Before I went digging, Lily woke up. She padded into the kitchen at midnight, dragging her blanket, and climbed into the chair across from me. "Mom," she said, "are we really homeless?" I closed the laptop. Some things matter more than evidence. I came around the table and crouched so we were eye to eye, the way you have to with kids when the words need to land. "No," I told her. "This is our house. It has been our house every single second of today, even when someone told you it wasn't. Nobody can take a home from us with a sign in the yard, and I'm going to prove that, so you never have to wonder again." She studied me with those serious eyes. "Are you going to yell at Grandma?" she asked. And there it was. The question that decided the whole story. Because the easy thing, the human thing, was to drive over there and scream until the windows rattled. I wanted to. I want you to know I wanted to. But screaming is a one-night thing. Screaming feels like justice and changes nothing by morning. "No," I said. "I'm not going to yell. I'm going to do something better. I'm going to be very, very calm and very, very thorough." She thought about that. Then she nodded, the way she does when she's decided to trust me, and went back to bed. I sat alone in the quiet and made myself a promise in 3 parts. Lily's safety came first. Always. No exceptions. The truth would be told on paper, where it couldn't be shouted down. And I would never, not once, raise my voice. Because I'd already learned that the quietest person in the room is usually the one holding the pen. Then I opened the drawer. The first thing I did the next morning, before coffee, before anything, was build a file. Not a digital one. Those feel weightless. A physical manila folder, the plain tan kind I order by the box for work, because there is something steadying about holding the truth in your hands. Into it went my first exhibit. I printed a certified copy of the deed, fresh from the county that morning, time-stamped and sealed. Samantha R. Hudson, sole owner, no co-signers, no joint tenants, no liens. I printed the homestead filing and the mortgage satisfaction. I laid them side by side on the kitchen table and I looked at them for a long time, and the looking did something good for me, because here was the bedrock fact that no amount of family drama could erode. They had not sold my house. They could not sell my house. Whatever document they'd produced to make that yellow sign appear, it was built on a forgery, and a forgery is not a transaction. It's a crime that hasn't been caught yet. I slid the deed into the folder and felt the weight of it. 3 pages. It didn't feel like much, but I've watched 3-page folders end careers and reverse fortunes and free people, because the law doesn't care how loud you are. It cares what you can prove. By the time Lily came down for breakfast, I'd already started a list on a legal pad, numbered in my careful courtroom handwriting. Item 1. The deed. Confirmed. Then I drew a line, and under it I wrote a single question that would point me at everyone responsible. If the deed is mine and only mine, then whose signature did they forge to fake the sale? The sold sign had a phone number on it, small white letters at the bottom, Reedy and Brooke Realty. So at 9 I made a call, and I did not call as the furious owner. I called as a curious buyer. "Hi," I said, warm and easy. "I'm driving down Birchwood and I saw a sold sign at the gray 2-story. Gorgeous block. Any chance that one fell through? I'd jump on it." The agent, a chipper young man named Devin, was happy to talk. "The listing was firm," he said, regretfully. "Under contract, offer accepted, closing in 2 weeks." Such a clean deal, he said. Seller signed the listing agreement last week. Everything's moving fast. I kept my voice light. Oh, lucky buyer. The seller's the owner, right? Sometimes these are estate sales. A pause. The owner signed personally, Devon said. We verified it. I thanked him and hung up, and sat very still, because there it was. The lie, spoken aloud and recorded in their files. The owner signed personally. Last week. I knew exactly where I was last week. In depositions, in court, in a building full of people and security cameras, and a sign-in log with my name and the time in ink. I had not signed anything for Reedy and Brooke Realty. I had never spoken to Devon or anyone like him in my life. Somewhere in that office sat a listing agreement with my name on it, written by a hand that wasn't mine. I added it to the legal pad. Item 2. A forged signature exists. In the realtor's file, dated to a week I can account for minute by minute. The fear was almost completely gone now. In its place was something cleaner and colder, the feeling I get right before I win. But a forged signature on a listing agreement still left a gap. To get a sold sign, you need more than a fake name on one page. You need the realtor to believe they're dealing with someone who can act for the owner, and that's when the bottom drawer gave up its secret. 6 years ago, when Lily was a toddler, I'd had an emergency surgery that went sideways and put me in a hospital bed for 9 days, sedated for some of it. Terrified and practical, I'd signed a limited power of attorney so my parents could pay my bills and handle urgent matters while I was under medical and financial necessities, temporary, in spirit. I meant to revoke it the week I came home. I never did. Life closed over the gap, the way it does. And there it sat, 6 years later, in my own filing cabinet, a document I'd handed my mother out of fear and love, now the master key she'd use to walk into my life and change the locks. I read it 3 times. It was limited. It did not authorize selling my home and pocketing the proceeds. Using it to enrich someone else was a flagrant breach of the duty it created, and forging my personal signature, instead of signing honestly as my attorney in fact, was its own separate crime. Proof they knew a straight reading of the POA would never fly. That was the whole trick of it. They'd waived the limited POA at a young realtor to look authorized enough to start the process, then forged my own hand on the listing agreement so nobody would ever stop to test how far that POA actually reached. Authority to open the door, a fake signature to walk through it. I wasn't angry at the paper. I was angry at 6 years ago me for being kind to people who would weaponize my kindness. I added it to the folder anyway. Item 3. A stale, limited POA, never revoked, abused. And then I underlined the word never, twice, because there are exactly 2 ways to fix a mistake like that, and I intended to use both. That afternoon my brother called, and Greg has never once called me without wanting something. He's 31 and perpetually 3 months from a comeback. He answered my hello with a sigh, like I was the inconvenience. Look, Sam, I know yesterday got messy, he said, but you have to understand the bigger picture here. The bigger picture, it turned out, was that Greg needed money. A business had folded. Credit cards had matured into threats. And Mom, bless her, had always said the house should really stay with the family, meaning him. Be reasonable, he said. You can buy another place. You do this for a living. I've got nowhere to land. I let him talk, because people who think they've already won tell you everything. Then he delivered the line I'll never forget. Casual as ordering lunch. Honestly, it's already done. This house has a new family now. A new family. While the old family, his actual 8-year-old niece, had been sitting in the snow 20 hours earlier because the new arrangement had no room for her. I didn't argue. I said I understood it was a hard spot for him, which was technically true, and cost me nothing. He took my calm for agreement, the way they all did, and got off the phone pleased with himself. I sat with what I'd learned. This wasn't my mother acting alone in a moment of cruelty. This was a plan, with a beneficiary, and the beneficiary was on the phone congratulating himself. Item 4 went on the pad. Greg. Knowing participant, intended to receive the proceeds. The folder was getting heavier. Good. In my experience, the heavier the folder, the quieter you can afford to be. For the next 2 days, I did something that I think a lot of people never learn to do. I kept being normal. I answered my mother's texts with short, neutral words. I let Greg believe I was thinking it over. I drove Lily to school and waved at Mrs. Petroff and made dinner and read the bedtime book in the silly voices. And in the cracks between all of it, I built. The manila folder grew a spine, certified deed, homestead filing, the realtor's listing details, screenshotted with the date visible. My court sign-in log from the week of the supposed signing, requested and received, putting me in a building 40 miles away. The old POA, with the limiting language highlighted in yellow. Voicemails saved and transcribed. My mother's text, "Don't make this dramatic," printed and dated. I wasn't hoarding because I'm dramatic. I hoard because paper outlives anger, and anger is the only thing my family had ever brought to a fight. If there's someone in your life who keeps forgetting what really happened, who rewrites the story every time you blink, let me tell you the most useful thing I know. Start writing it down. Dates, words, screenshots, the boring receipts of your own life. You won't always need them. But the day you do, calm beats loud every single time, and a folder beats a feeling. If this story is sitting a little too close to your own, do me a favor and subscribe. Because the next part is where I stopped collecting and started filing, and that's where everything turned. By Thursday, the folder was nearly full. I had the what and the who. What I didn't have yet was the why in their own words. Then Aunt Carol texted me. Aunt Carol is my mother's younger sister, 58, the family member who always slips you $20 at funerals and disagrees with everyone in a whisper. Her text said only, "I shouldn't be sending you this. But that baby in the snow broke my heart. You deserve to know what they said." Then they came in, one after another, screenshots of a group chat called Hudson Family Planning. I had never been in it. They'd built a chat about my house, my child, my life, and made sure I'd never see it. I made coffee, I sat down, and I read the cold machinery of it from the inside. My mother, 3 weeks back. Sam doesn't need a house that size for one kid. Greg needs the cushion. We'll handle the paperwork while she's buried in that big case. My father. Will the realtor really not need her there? My mother. We have the power of attorney. That's the whole point. Devin's young, he won't dig. Greg, with a thumbs up emoji. When does the sign go up? They scheduled it for the snow day on purpose, because they knew I'd be stuck in court. They picked the afternoon Lily would be released early. They knew she'd come home. And there, in my mother's own thumbs, sat the line that turned my stomach to stone. My father had asked, "What if the girl shows up before we're packed?" And my mother had written back, "If the kid shows up, she can wait at the gate. Builds character." Wait at the gate. Not a spur-of-the-moment cruelty, a pre-written stage direction. They'd discussed leaving my daughter in the cold the way you'd discuss where to park. I forwarded every screenshot to myself, twice, and added them to the folder. But the last screenshot was the one that made me smile for the first time in days. My mother, confident. Once it closes, she can't undo it. Oh, Mom. Undoing things is the entire job. I scrolled the whole thing twice, the way you reread a contract before you sign, looking for the parts that matter most. The chat went back 6 weeks. This wasn't a flash of temper. It was a slow, patient theft, planned in the open by 3 people who assumed I'd never be in the room. There were good details too, the kind I needed. My father had wobbled. Twice he'd typed things like, "I don't love doing it behind her back," and "She trusted us with that POA for the hospital, not for this." Both times my mother had steamrolled him with a wall of justification, and both times he'd gone quiet and stayed in. That mattered to me, though not the way he'd have hoped. It told me he knew. Knowing and doing it anyway is worse than not knowing, not better. Greg was the engine. He'd pushed the timeline hard because, and he actually typed this, "The cards are calling daily. I need this closed by the 15th." a man drowning in his own choices, reaching for the nearest thing that wasn't his. And my mother was the architect, calm and certain, treating the whole operation like a kindness she was doing the family by correcting the universe's bookkeeping. Nobody in that chat sounded like a villain to themselves. That's the part people get wrong about how this works. They didn't think they were monsters. They thought they were fixing something unfair, and that the unfairness was me having more than my brother. I closed the screenshots. I felt strangely calm. I now had the what, the who, the how, and the why, all of it documented, none of it deniable. Everything I'd ever tell a client to want, I had. The only thing left was to choose my weapon, and I already knew it wouldn't be my voice. Here's the thing about a fight like this. My mother's weapons were the only ones she'd ever had. Manipulation, a rewritten story, a forged name, the assumption that I'd absorb it like I always had. Loud weapons, fast weapons, and the temptation, the real pull, was to fight her with the same tools, to call, to scream, to match her volume. But you don't beat a liar by being louder. You beat a liar with documents because documents don't flinch and don't apologize and can't be talked over at Thanksgiving. So that night I opened a blank page and started drafting, and what I drafted wasn't a furious letter. It was a revocation of power of attorney. 3 paragraphs, clean and dated. The language I've written 100 times for clients whose families turned on them. I, Samantha R. Hudson, hereby revoke. It felt like exhaling. While it printed, I thought about that one word I'd sent my mother in Mrs. Petrov's living room. Okay. She'd read it as a white flag. But okay had never meant surrender. It meant the conversation was over and the work had begun. Now the work had a shape. I'd revoke the POA and put it on record where she couldn't argue with it. I'd hand the realtor and the title company the forged signature next to my courthouse alibi and watch their deal evaporate. And I'd report what needed reporting. The forgery to the police, the 4 hours in the snow to the people whose job is children. Her manipulation against my paperwork, her noise against my silence, her family chat against a county clerk's stamp. I signed the revocation, slid it into the folder, and looked at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Somewhere across town, 3 people were sleeping soundly, certain it was already done. Before I pulled a single trigger, I called Ray Ramsey. Ray's a detective now, but 15 years ago we were broke, law and criminal justice students who shared a terrible apartment and a worse couch. And he's the one person whose judgment I trust over my own when I'm too close to something. I told him all of it, flat and chronological, the way he taught me to give a statement. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sam, walk me through what you've actually got." So I did. The clean deed, the forged listing agreement in the realtor's file, the court log proving where I was, the group chat where they planned it, including the line about the gate. The stale POA used to enrich a third party. He let out a low whistle. "That's not a feeling," he said. "That's a case. 2 cases, honestly. The property fraud and the kid." Then he gave me the part I needed most. Order of operations. "Revoke the POA and record it first," he said. "Notify the title company and the realtor with the forgery affidavit that kills the sale at the root today. Then file the police report so it's documented before anyone can claim they're being persecuted. The child welfare report you can make any time, but make it, and keep the neighbor's account." He paused. "Do it in that sequence and the system does the rest. You don't have to yell at anybody. You just hand the right paper to the right desk." I wrote it all on the legal pad, numbered, the way I number everything. 16 hours, I thought. Maybe less. That's all it takes once the paper's in the right hands. I thanked Ray and hung up, and looked at my full folder and my numbered list and my sleeping daughter's door. For the first time since Mrs. Petrov called, I felt absolutely steady. Tomorrow I'd start handing out paper. Getting the forged listing agreement was easier than it should have been, which tells you how little anyone had expected the real owner to come knocking. As the actual owner of record, I had every right to demand the document purporting to authorize a sale of my home. A short, professional email to Reedy and Brooke on my firm's letterhead, requesting a copy of the listing agreement for my own property at my own address, produced it within the hour. Devon, the chipper agent, had gone quiet and careful by then. People do, when letterhead arrives. I opened the PDF and there it was. My name, Samantha R. Hudson, signed in flowing cursive at the bottom of the agreement. Except it wasn't my signature. I've signed my name maybe a million times. I know its weight and slant and the way I never close the loop on the A. This signature closed the loop on the A. The S was wrong. The date was wrong in the way that mattered most. Because it was the same Tuesday I'd spent in a deposition with a court reporter, 2 opposing attorneys, and a security camera. I laid the forged agreement next to a stack of documents I'd genuinely signed, and the difference was so obvious a child could spot it. Then I laid it next to my court sign-in log, my name and the time in the clerk's ink. Item complete. The forgery wasn't a theory anymore. It was a piece of paper with a fake me on it, dated to a day I could prove down to the minute. I slid it into the manila folder, which by now held deed, homestead, POA, screenshots, alibi, and forgery. The whole architecture of their plan, and the whole architecture of its collapse. The folder was full. It was time to start emptying it. I want to pause here on something, because it's the engine under everything that happened next. My family had a story about me, and they'd believed it so long they'd stopped checking whether it was true. In their story, I was the struggling single mom, the daughter who'd had a hard divorce and was barely keeping her head up, who did something with houses downtown, who could be talked into anything if you framed it as family. That story was convenient. It let my mother decide I didn't need a house that size. It let Greg decide my home was a cushion he was owed. The trouble with their story was that none of it was current. I wasn't barely keeping my head up. I was a real estate attorney with 11 years in, a partner track caseload, and a specialty. This is the part they'd somehow never absorbed. In exactly this kind of fraud. Forged deeds, abused powers of attorney, family members who decide a signature is a suggestion. I win those cases for strangers. I'd won one the very week they printed their sold sign. They'd planned a property crime against the one person at the table who unwinds property crimes for a living, and they'd done it because they pictured a woman who'd cry and cave. I didn't tell them any of this. Why would I? You don't show your hand to people who've already shown you theirs. I just let the old story stand a few more days, the helpless daughter, while I quietly assembled the case that would end it. They saw someone who'd say yes. They'd forgotten, or never known, that I do this for a living. And the gap between who they thought I was and who I actually am, that gap was about to become the loudest thing in their lives. My mother could feel the ground shifting, the way predators do when the prey stops running. Her texts changed. The "don't make this dramatic" tone gave way to something needier and sharper. Sammy, we need to talk like adults. You're being cold. This isn't like you. Then, when silence didn't bend me. After everything we did for you, you'd really put your own mother through this? I read each one and felt almost nothing, which surprised me. 6 months ago, that last line would have wrecked me for a day. After everything we did for you. The classic. The debt you can never repay because it was never real, and the interest is whatever they need from you today. I knew the move because I'd watched her run it my whole life. Guilt as a lever, family as a hostage, but guilt only works on people who haven't seen the receipts. And I'd just spent a week reading the receipts. I didn't argue with her. Arguing would have given her a foothold, a thread to pull, a way to make it a two-sided thing where reasonable people disagree. Instead, I sent her exactly one reply, and I chose it like I choose words in a brief. Noted. That was all. Noted. Not angry, not pleading, not a door she could push on. She called 4 times that night. I let it ring. Each missed call was a small, strange gift, because it was her using up her loud weapons on a wall that wasn't going to move, while across town my quiet ones were already loaded and aimed. She thought the fight was happening in our text thread. The fight was actually happening at the county recorder's office, at a title company, and at a police station. and she hadn't even noticed it had started. Through all of it, I kept my eyes on the only person who actually mattered. Lily was not okay, and pretending otherwise would have made me no better than the people who left her in the snow. She didn't want to sleep alone. She asked, more than once and in different sneaky ways, whether Grandma still hated her. She'd stopped drawing the two-stick figure family. Kids don't have the words, so they show you, and she was showing me. So I did the things that actually help. I told her, in plain words, that what happened was not her fault, and not normal, and not love, no matter who did it. I found her a kind therapist, a woman with a sand tray, and zero judgment. And we went together first so the office wouldn't feel scary. I did not, ever, ask Lily to repeat the story for my case, because a child is not evidence, and her healing is not a strategy. The only account I used was Mrs. Petrov's, freely given, and the bare facts. One afternoon Mrs. Petrov came by with cookies and sat with Lily at the crayon table, and I heard her say, in her thick, warm accent, "You were never homeless here, Lapochka. This street remembers you. This street loves you." Lily almost smiled. It was the first almost in days. That night, after Lily fell asleep, I stood in the kitchen and let myself feel the size of it for exactly 1 minute. The image of my daughter's bare hands tucked into her sleeves, waiting politely at a gate because the adults she trusted told her to. 1 minute. Then I put it away, where the useful version of me keeps things, and went back to the folder. The minute was for grief. The folder was for justice. Tomorrow, the folder went to work. The morning I started handing out paper, I wore the suit I save for closings. Not for them. For me. First stop, the county recorder's office, where I filed the revocation of power of attorney and had it recorded, stamped, and time-marked into the permanent public record. 3 paragraphs that shut the master key off from this moment forward. Recording it didn't magically undo what they'd already attempted. The forged signature and the overreach beyond a limited POA would handle that part. But it guaranteed they could never reach for that authority again, and now the fact of it lived in the same public database as my deed. The clerk stamped it at 9:40 in the morning. I noted the time. Second stop didn't need a stop at all. It needed an email and a phone call. I contacted the title company handling the so-called sale, identified myself as the sole owner of record, and sent them 3 things: my certified deed, the recorded revocation, and a signed affidavit of forgery stating plainly that I had never executed the listing agreement and that my signature on it was fraudulent. I attached my court log for good measure. I was polite. I was specific. I used numbers and dates. And I watched, in real time, a multi-week real estate transaction begin to die. The title company's response came within the hour, and it was the sound of professionals realizing they were standing near a crime. They placed the file on immediate hold pending verification. Translation: the sale stopped breathing at 10:30 in the morning. No closing, no transfer, no new family. Just a frozen escrow account and a lot of very nervous emails I'd never have to send because they'd send them for me. I drove to my next stop with the radio off and the heat on. Perfectly calm. 2 levers pulled before lunch, and neither one required raising my voice. The deed had held. The key was destroyed. And the clock, the 16-hour clock nobody else knew was running, had quietly started. The 3rd and 4th levers were the heavy ones, and I'd saved them for last on purpose, because Ray was right about order. By the time I walked into the police station, the sale was already frozen, which meant nobody could say I was reporting a crime to win an argument. The argument was over. I was reporting a crime because a crime had been committed. I filed a report for forgery and fraud, and I made it easy for them, because a tired detective with a clean folder is a detective who acts. I handed over copies, never originals, of the forged listing agreement, the deed, the recorded revocation, my court log, and the group chat screenshots in which 3 people planned to sell my house using a power of attorney they knew didn't authorize it. The officer flipped through it slowly. "Ma'am," he said, "this is very organized." I told him I'd had practice. Then I did the last thing, the one that had nothing to do with the house, and everything to do with the 4 hours. I made a report to Child Protective Services about an 8-year-old left outside in freezing weather for the better part of an evening by the adults responsible for her, with a neighbor as witness. I gave them Mrs. Petrov's name and the timeline and nothing more, because they didn't need more. I want to be honest with you about something here. I filed these reports. I did not control what happened after, and I'd never pretend I did. The system moves on its own schedule and by its own rules. But the facts were airtight, and airtight facts have a way of moving things. I walked out into the cold afternoon, folder lighter now, copies distributed to every desk that mattered. Then I went home, made dinner, read the bedtime book in the silly voices, and waited. That evening was the strangest one of my life, because nothing happened in it, and everything was about to. I told no one in my family a single word. Not a warning, not a threat, not a hint. My mother was still texting into the void, still calling, still certain the battle was being fought in our message thread where she knew the terrain. She had no idea the real fight had been fought and won that morning, in offices she'd never set foot in, by a daughter she'd never bothered to know. I tucked Lily in. I checked the locks, the same locks my mother had used against my child, and I felt a grim little satisfaction that they only opened for me now. I made a cup of tea I didn't drink. And I sat at the kitchen table under the crayon horses and did the hardest thing in any plan, which is nothing. Waiting. I thought about the word I'd sent 4 days earlier, the white flag that wasn't. Okay. It had carried me all the way here, from a courtroom hallway to Mrs. Petrov's blankets to the county recorder's stamp, one syllable holding the whole plan inside it like a fist. I'd sent that one word days ago. The 16 hours that actually mattered had started that morning, at a clerk's desk. Now the paperwork was about to say the rest, in 3 different offices, in the order Ray had given me, while I drank tea I didn't want. I looked at the clock above the stove. 9:45. By morning, the title company would call its client. The realtor would call his seller. A detective would start making calls of his own. 3 phones, across one town, ready to ring. I rinsed my mug, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. For the first time in days, I slept all the way through. The call started at 8:40 the next morning, and I know the timing because Aunt Carol gave me the play-by-play for weeks afterward, delighted and horrified in equal measure. The first phone to ring was Greg's. It was the realtor, Devin, no longer chipper, his voice doing that careful thing voices do when a young man realizes he's been used as the instrument of a felony. He told Greg the sale was dead. Frozen. The title company had received an affidavit of forgery from the actual owner of record, and there would be no closing, not in 2 weeks, not ever, and that the office was now obligated to cooperate with an inquiry. Greg, Carol said, made a sound she'd never heard a grown man make. The cards were calling daily, and the thing he'd reached for to make them stop had just turned to smoke in his hands. The second phone was my mother's. The title company called her directly, because she was the one who'd presented herself as authorized, and a very polite, very chilly representative informed her that the power of attorney she'd relied on had been formally revoked and recorded, that the signature on the listing agreement appeared to be fraudulent, and that the matter had been referred. My mother, who had typed, "Once it closes, she can't undo it," with such confidence, learned in one phone call that it had not closed, that I had undone it, and that undone was the kindest word anyone would use for a while. This house has a new family now, Greg had told me. By 9 in the morning, the house had exactly the family it had always had, me and Lily and a deed with one name on it. And the people who'd tried to install a new one were standing in the rubble of their own plan, phones in hand, finally understanding that the quiet daughter had not been quiet because she was beaten. She'd been quiet because she was working. The third phone to ring that morning was mine, and it was my mother, and she was screaming before I even finished saying hello. "What did you do?" The words came out shredded. "What did you do, Samantha?" I held the phone a few inches from my ear and let her empty the first wave, because there's no point talking into a scream. When she paused to breathe, I answered in the flat. even voice I use for opposing counsel who've lost the thread. I revoked a power of attorney I should have revoked 6 years ago, I said. And I notified the title company that my signature on a listing agreement for my own house was forged. That's all I did. She came apart in stages. First the fury. I was ungrateful. I was cruel. I was tearing the family to pieces over a misunderstanding. Then the tears, right on schedule, the ones that had ended every argument of my childhood. How could you do this to your own mother? And when neither the fury nor the tears moved me, the blame, fast and ugly, that none of it would have happened if I'd just been reasonable, if I'd just shared, if I weren't so cold. I let her run all the way down. Then I said the only thing I'd planned to say, quietly, the way you set down something heavy. You told an 8-year-old to wait at the gate, I said. You wrote it in a group chat 3 weeks before you did it. So now you can do the waiting. Wait for the title company. Wait for the detective. Wait for the call. Wait at this gate. The phrase had cost my daughter 4 hours in the snow. I handed it back to my mother gently, without heat, and listened to it land in the silence on the other end. She started to say my name. I'd already said everything I came to say. The detective from the fraud report reached my mother and Greg that same afternoon, asking them to come in and discuss a listing agreement and a recorded revocation, in that bland official tone that means a great deal more than it says. Around the same time, a child welfare caseworker called to schedule a visit regarding an incident on a snowy evening involving a minor and a locked door. 2 calls, both polite, both quietly enormous. And in the middle of all of it, my father called me. Not my mother. My father, who had stayed in the warm car at the curb while his granddaughter sat down in the snow. I almost didn't pick up. But I did, because some part of me wanted to hear what he'd say. His voice was small and broken in a way I'd never heard from him. Sammy, he said. I didn't think she'd actually be out there that long. I thought it'd be a few minutes. I thought your mother would. And he stopped, because there was no end to that sentence that wasn't an indictment. For 1 second I felt the old pull, the daughter's reflex to make her father feel better. Then I remembered the group chat. What if the girl shows up before we're packed? He'd asked the question. He'd known she might come. He'd driven away anyway. You asked what would happen if she showed up, I said. You knew. And you left her there. Silence. He didn't argue, because there was nothing to argue. That was the closest any of them came to seeing themselves clearly. My father, on the phone, hearing his own question read back to him. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't redemption. It was just a man, briefly, glimpsing what he was. Then he said he was sorry. The cheap kind, the kind that asks for something back. I told him goodbye and meant it. By the end of that week, the official version of events caught up with the true one, which is all justice really is, the paperwork agreeing with reality at last. The title company formally canceled the escrow and unwound the file. The yellow sold sign came off my lawn one gray morning, hauled away by a quiet crew from Reedy and Brook who would not meet my eyes, and the patch of grass it left behind was the most beautiful brown rectangle I'd ever seen. My deed stood exactly as it had always stood. One owner of record. Samantha R. Hudson. The house had never, for one legal second, belonged to anyone but me, no matter what a sign in the yard had claimed for 11 days. I want to be precise about this part because it's the whole point. They never owned a single brick of my home. Not one. The only thing they ever managed to take possession of was a lie, a forged signature, a fake sale, a story about a homeless little girl. And the cruel joke they never saw coming is that the lie got recorded too. It went into the police file. It went into the title company's records. It went into a county database that doesn't forget. My mother had been so sure that once it closed, I couldn't undo it. But it never closed, because the law required my signature, and my signature required me, and I had been standing in a courthouse with 100 witnesses the day they pretended I'd signed. The fraud collapsed under its own weight the instant a real document touched it. That's not luck. That's how it's designed. You cannot outshout a recorded fact. People try every day. They lose every day. And I had built my entire quiet little campaign on knowing exactly that. My mother called one last time, near the end of that week, and it was the saddest and most predictable call of all. She cycled through everything: rage, weeping, bargaining, the long inventory of sacrifices I owed her for, the warning that I was destroying the family, the plea that we could put this all behind us if I'd just call off whatever I'd set in motion. As if I were a weather system she could negotiate with. As if the title company and the detective and the caseworker were my employees instead of strangers following facts I'd handed them and then let go. When she finally ran out of words, there was a long quiet, and into it she said, almost a whisper, "Please, Sammy, what do you want me to do?" And I gave her the only honest answer I had, in the calm voice I'd kept the entire time, the voice that had never once gone up. "You can wait at the gate now, Mom," I said. "The paperwork will let you know when it's done." I heard her breath catch. Her own words, her own daughter, her own plan, all of it circled back and set gently in her lap. Then I said the word I'd been saying since the beginning, the one she'd mistaken for surrender 4 phones and a frozen escrow ago. I said, "Okay." And I hung up. The kitchen was quiet. Lily's crayon horses watched from the wall. I sat there for a minute, not triumphant exactly, just done. The specific piece of a case fully closed. Then I got up and started dinner, because my daughter would be hungry soon, and we were home, and we always had been. The aftermath was quieter than the movie's promise, and more permanent. The sale was void, formally and forever. My deed never so much as flinched. The revocation sat recorded at the county, a tidy little headstone over my mother's master key. Over the following months, because real cases crawl, they don't sprint. The forgery and fraud reports moved into the hands of people whose job is exactly that. An investigation opened. In time, the matter was referred for prosecution, with my mother named as the architect and Greg as the willing beneficiary, and it proceeded the way these cases do, on the system's schedule, not mine. I didn't push for the maximum of anything. I didn't need to. I'd never wanted them destroyed. I'd wanted them stopped, and stopped they were. The Child Welfare Review substantiated its findings about the evening in the snow and referred the matter onward, which is all I'll say, because an 8-year-old's file is hers and not a story I get to tell for views. Greg's rescue evaporated. The cards kept calling. My mother, who had treated a fiduciary duty like a suggestion, learned that breaching one has a civil price tag attached, and that the daughter she'd underestimated knew precisely how to attach it. My father drifted to the edges, sending the occasional message that mistook nostalgia for amends, and I let them sit unanswered. I felt no fireworks about any of it. What I felt mostly was tired and clean, the way you feel after washing something that had been dirty a long time. The folder went into the bottom drawer where the POA used to live, and I hoped never to open it again. Mostly, though, I felt the absence of a thing I'd carried my whole life without naming it, the low hum of waiting for my family to finally treat me fairly. I'd stopped waiting. It was the lightest I'd felt in years. I set the boundary the way I do everything now, in writing and without apology. No contact with my mother or Greg, all communication routed through counsel. My father gets the bare minimum, supervised and rare, because forgiveness is mine to give on my terms and not a thing anyone can demand by being sorry on a phone. People ask if cutting off your own parents is cold. I tell them what I told Lily. A home isn't a building, and it isn't blood. A home is where the lock's open for you, and the truth gets told. Lily started sleeping in her own room again about a month in. The therapist with the sand tray worked small miracles slowly. One afternoon I came into the kitchen and found her at the crayon table drawing, and there, on the page, were 2 stick figures again, a tall one and a small one, holding hands in front of a square house with a brown rectangle of grass out front and no sign in it. By the door, on the little brass hook, hung a brand new pair of red mittens, because I'd bought 3 pairs that week and tucked them in every coat and bag she owned. She will never again wait bare-handed at a gate, not while I'm holding the pen. A title can be forged, a sign can be planted in a yard, and a grandmother can point a frightened child toward the cold. But a recorded fact is the one thing manipulation can never outshout, and the quietest okay in the room is sometimes the sound of a door closing for good. That's my story. A sold sign that meant nothing, 4 hours in the snow that meant everything, and 16 hours of quiet paperwork that ended it for good. If this reminded you to revoke an old power of attorney or to put a boundary in writing while it's still easy, take that as your sign and do it today. Share this with someone who needs it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.